I'll verify the checkable claims before rewriting. Section Hook. In 1676, a man named Fujibayashi Yasutake titled his manuscript 10,000 Rivers Merging into One Ocean. It preserved the espionage techniques his family's hidden village had accumulated, real-world Sheikah knowledge inked onto paper because it was dying out. But here's what would break Link's brain. Yasutake's village didn't answer to a wise elder. It ran on a written constitution with a standing council of military commissioners and a mutual defense pact with the hidden village next door. The actual shinobi was stranger than anything Nintendo ever put in Hyrule. If you've played almost any Zelda game, you know Kakariko Village. Tucked behind mountains, hidden from the wider kingdom, populated by people who served the royal family from the shadows. In Breath of the Wild, the Sheikah are an ancient warrior clan living in a secluded valley, guarding forbidden knowledge and ancient technology. In Ocarina of Time, Kakariko sits at the base of Death Mountain, a village with secrets literally built into its walls. Nintendo didn't invent this idea. They borrowed it from the same place nearly every ninja story in games, anime, and film borrows it. The concept of the hidden village, the settlement tucked into mountains where shadow warriors live in secret, descends from real places in central Japan, 2 of them specifically. And the Fujibayashi name belongs to one of the families that ran one of them. But what Yasutake actually preserved in his manuscript, what the real hidden villages looked like from the inside, doesn't match the fantasy at all. No mysterious chief handing down missions from a pagoda, no black-clad warriors flipping across rooftops. The reality was more mundane, more political, and honestly more interesting. Because the real hidden villages governed themselves, in writing, by committee. Yasutake's world was Iga Province, modern Maya Prefecture in central Japan. Just north of Iga, across a mountain ridge, sat the Koka district of Omi Province, modern Shiga Prefecture. That's the place you probably know as Koga from anime and manga. Today, the Japanese government has designated the 2 regions together as a single Japan heritage story, formally recognizing them as the shinobi's regions of origin. Which of those 2 Yasutake actually came from is honestly unsettled. The manuscript's colophon signs him as a man of Koka in Omi. But the Fujibayashi are best known as one of the great houses of Iga, and his translators think he was probably an Iga man. The book itself draws on both. Keep that in mind. The hidden villages were a pair, and the sources blur across the ridge between them, and the geography matters. Iga and Koka sit ringed by the Suzuka Mountains to the east and the Kasagi Mountains to the west. They're valleys, walled off from easy access. But here's the critical detail that separates reality from the Zelda version. These weren't remote wilderness. Koka sat directly on the Tokaido, the main highway connecting Kyoto and Edo. Iga was a short march from both Kyoto and Nara, the 2 ancient capitals of Japan. In Zelda terms, imagine Kakariko Village not hidden deep in the frontier, but sitting just off the main road between Hyrule Castle and Gerudo Town. Close enough to the centers of power that you could walk there in a day, but protected by mountain passes that made the place easy to defend and brutal to invade. That positioning is exactly what made these communities useful. The shinobi clans of Iga and Koka weren't isolated hermits. They were strategically positioned insiders who happened to control terrain that larger armies couldn't easily enter. Writing generations later, an Edo period geographical survey of Omi, called the Omi Yochi Shiryaku, glosses the word shinobi with a phrase that essentially amounts to shinobi no mono. That means Iga and Koga. At least by the Edo period, the profession Adishin and the place had become functionally the same word, and the families who lived there built something no Zelda game has ever depicted: a government. In the second half of the 15th century, the warrior families of Iga did something unusual. They stopped obeying the Shugo, the provincial governor appointed by Japan's central military government. On paper, Iga still had one, the Nikki clan. In practice, from 1477 onward, the record describes a province that answered to no outside lord. But they didn't descend into chaos. Around 1560, they produced a written constitutional document laying out principles of mutual defense and voluntary association between villages. This wasn't a top-down decree. It was an agreement between armed communities choosing to cooperate. The system it created had a name, the Iga Sokoku Iki, a self-governing league. And it had a partner. The Iga League and Koka's own self-governing commune fought as allies as early as 1487, when warriors from both regions turned out at the Battle of Magari to help the Rokaku clan fend off a shogunal army. Under their compact, governance of the alliance ran through a joint council, 10 military commissioners from Iga, 12 from Koka, meeting on the border between their territories. Let that land for a second. Every hidden village in fiction, Kakariko, Konohagakure from Naruto, any of them, answers to a single chief or elder. The real hidden villages ran a cross-border council of 22 commissioners. We don't know how those seats were filled. Nobody should tell you they were elected in any modern sense, but the number and the meeting place were fixed in writing. A peer-reviewed paper in Constitutional Political Economy frames this in broader terms, citing scholars Adolphson and Ramsayer, who argue that medieval Japan maintained what they call a market in private governments. The Iga-Koka alliance looks like one product of that market, a negotiated, written compact between armed communities. Not romantic, not mystical, constitutional, and by the way, the old story that Iga and Koka were blood enemies is mostly fiction. Japanese language accounts flatly call it a misunderstanding, two neighbors separated by a mountain who worked out that fighting each other paid nobody. Relations weren't always warm before 1487, but from then until 1574, what the record shows is a standing alliance. The two systems weren't identical though. Koka's commune, called Eso, is described as operating on roughly equal standing and majority decision, genuinely egalitarian. Iga was more oligarchic. Japanese accounts name 3 senior houses, Hattori, Momochi, and Fujibayashi, whose voices carried the room when the council met. Some of the famous individuals attached to those names, like Momochi Sandayu, sit closer to legend than to documented biography. But an armed oligarchy with a written charter is still not the same thing as a democracy, and it's a universe away from the wise village elder of fantasy. So what did the people of these constitutional hidden villages actually do all day? This is where the gap between Zelda and reality gets widest. The popular image, and the one Nintendo clearly draws from, is the shadowy warrior, dressed in black, armed with throwing stars, vanishing in smoke. Professor Stephen Turnbull, a visiting professor at Meisei University's Ninja Studies program, which is billed as the only academic institution in the world dedicated to studying ninja, argues in his book Ninja, Unmasking the Myth, that the black clothes and the iron throwing stars are, in his phrase, complete inventions. Professor Yamada Yuji, the research center's vice director, who works primarily from documentary sources, gets more specific. Asked what a ninja's essential piece of kit really was, Yamada has said there's no evidence they habitually carried shuriken at all. The closest thing to a real signature tool was the kunai, a digging and prying implement. Not a throwing star, something closer to a trowel. And that fits because the people of Iga and Koka were, in their daily lives, rural landholders. The popular legend says farmers by day, assassins by night, and that phrase gets repeated constantly. But it flattens the truth. They weren't secret identity peasants. They were jisamurai, land-holding warrior gentry who farmed their own fields and hired themselves out as specialists in espionage, infiltration, arson, and sabotage. The documented core of shinobi work wasn't assassination. It was intelligence gathering. As Yamada puts it, the job was to find out what a commander couldn't otherwise know: the lie of the ground, the state of the enemy's food supply, how his castle was built. Scouting, setting fires behind enemy lines, getting in and getting out with information. The reason they rarely appear in official records isn't just secrecy. It's that this kind of work was considered dishonorable next to open samurai combat. Nobody bragged about hiring them. Nobody carved their names into monuments. And that documentary vacuum is precisely what allowed the legend to inflate over centuries into throwing stars and backflips. Yasutake understood this problem. His manuscript wasn't a fantasy novel. It was a technical manual, and it says plainly that it summarizes an older ninjutsu text called the Kanrin Seiyo, selecting only those points that fit the times. He was a Tokugawa-era man, writing during decades of peace, watching real expertise evaporate, trying to press it onto paper before the last people who understood it died. Every hidden village story needs a catastrophe. In Zelda, it's Calamity Ganon. In Iga, it was Oda Nobunaga. In October 1579, Nobunaga's son Oda Nobukatsu marched into Iga. By most accounts, without his father's permission, he failed. The terrain that had kept Iga autonomous for a century did exactly what it was supposed to do. Mountain passes, fortified valley residences, and a population trained in irregular warfare chewed up a conventional army. Nobunaga's reaction to the news, the chronicles say, was fury at his own son. 2 years later, in the autumn of 1581, Nobunaga launched his own invasion on a vastly larger scale. 6 armies drove into the province from 6 directions at once. You'll see wildly varying troop figures quoted for this, anywhere from 40 to 60,000, and none of them are stable enough to state as fact. What isn't disputed is the outcome. The villages burned. The fortifications fell. Iga's century of self-governance ended in fire and scattering. Koka's commune had already submitted to Nobunaga years earlier, in the spring of 1574, which is where the standing alliance ends in the record. By 1581, both hidden villages were finished as independent powers. The families scattered across Japan. Some found service under Tokugawa Ieyasu. His retainer Hattori Hanzo came from an Iga family and survived in a new role. Others disappeared into the countryside. The Fujibayashi name survived too, but attached to the keeping of memory rather than to active practice. By the time Yasutake sat down to write in 1676, nearly a full century had passed since the destruction. He titled his work the Bansen Shukai, 10,000 rivers merging into one ocean, and the metaphor reads as deliberate. He was gathering streams of knowledge from scattered families across both Iga and Koka and merging them into a single document before they dried up entirely. It's tempting to call the Bansen Shukai the Ninja Bible. Marketing copy often does, but that label hides what makes it genuinely remarkable, and it oversells what it is. This is not a battlefield manual carried into war. It's a peacetime compilation written roughly a century after the wars it describes by a man abridging someone else's older book, which makes it evidence of what 17th century Iga and Koka men believed and wanted preserved. An act of preservation by someone who knew his world was already gone. It's what you'd get if the last Sheikah sat down after Calamity Ganon and wrote everything the Order had ever known, not for warriors, but for the future. Here's the part that stays with me. Professor Yamada, working from Mie University, traces the emergence of shinobi as a distinct occupational role back to the 14th century, during the Northern and Southern Courts era, the Nanbokucho Wars. That means the tradition Yasutake was trying to preserve reaches back more than 300 years before he picked up his brush. 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge about terrain, deception, chemistry, and human psychology, developed not by mystical shadow warriors, but by armed landholders with a written charter and a standing border council. That's the real hidden village, not a fantasy trope, a political experiment run by people who grew rice and gathered intelligence, who ignored the lord they nominally answered to, and who maintained a cross-border alliance of 22 commissioners until an overwhelming army burned it all down. Nintendo gave us Kakariko. History gave us something stranger, a self-governing league of spies who carried digging tools. Now, there's a thread here I haven't pulled. The Bansen Shuyi tells us it condenses that older text, the Kanrin Seiyo, keeping only what fit the times. What was in the parts left out? What knowledge did a 17th century man look at and decide the world no longer needed? I don't have an answer for you, and I'm not sure anyone has published one. And then there's the Hattori, the Iga family whose most famous son ended up a Tokugawa retainer, with Iga men posted on the gates of Edo Castle, which is its own wild story. If you want to be here when I pull those threads, subscribe and stick around. The rivers keep merging. I'll see you at the ocean.